Hi, everybody. I guess before we start, I think the thing that we wanted to talk about that wasn't mentioned in our bios is that Tiffany and I are truly sisters. One of the things that I know we both feel very passionately about is the power of the horizontal sisterhood. You know, Tiffany and I are in the same generation, and we are constantly hooking each other up. We're constantly giving each other guidance about our careers, our professional lives, our personal lives, and we're always supporting one another. And so I'm very grateful to have you in my life.
Yeah, you're awesome. Whenever people ask me, Tiffany, how do you manage to run a national organization and you have 2 small children and you've got a husband who's clear on the other side of the world and you're on the Harlem for Kids board and you're involved in your sorority and you're doing all of this mentoring, how do you do it? And my answer is always women, and it's women like Reshma, who I've called several times and who has been incredibly supportive of my leadership. So thank you very much for proving that the narrative around women not supporting themselves is so yesterday.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so we wanted to start by asking a couple questions. How many of you have voted for a woman before? Raise your hand. That's great. How many have written a campaign contribution to a candidate? How many of you believe that we can make a huge difference in the world by having more women in elected office? Great.
Fantastic. I'm going to take a little bit of time to just frame and give a narrative and talk a little bit about why we need more women in leadership, but more specifically, what some of the barriers are. Because I think based on the hands that were raised, we've got a pretty friendly crowd, and we all know why we need more women in leadership. But I really want us to get to what some of the barriers are. This is Leah Webb. Leah was a healthcare worker in upstate New York. She was really concerned about the rates of obesity in her community, really felt that her residents would be healthier if they had access to fresh food. There was a Popeye's chicken, there was a McDonald's, there was not a grocery store within the city limits. There hadn't been one in 15 years. We heard about Leah because she was making a bit of a ruckus at the city council meetings, talking about how we need to get a grocery store in this town. And we met with Leah and we suggested to her that she run for office. There was going to be an open seat on the city council, and she had been lobbying around this grocery store for at least a year. What do you imagine her response was to our invitation to run for office? No, hell no, I'm not running for office. I've been going to those city council meetings for an entire year. Those people don't listen, right? Nobody looks like me. Long story short, we invite Leah. She comes to a training. We get the right people to invite her to run. She runs. She becomes the first Black person, the youngest person ever to sit on the city council in Binghamton. And within 2 years, she's broken ground on her grocery store. So the point of this story is that the White House Project has been able to train and recruit thousands of women to run for office, not only because we asked them to lead, but because we connected where they wanted to create impact in the world to a different kind of leadership trajectory. And that's really the important piece around inspiring and getting more women to run, is first tapping into what they want to change and what's really important to them. Today, the U.S. ranks really pathetically when it comes to women's leadership. We all know this, and that's what we're here to change. It's hard to imagine that there are 79 countries who have more women in political leadership than the leading democracy, but those are the facts. There are a lot of barriers to women's leadership. Some of those we know. It includes culture, discrimination, lack of economic power. But the truth is that women are underrepresented because women don't run. So that's what we want to spend the majority of our time really talking about and framing here today. We're going to bust a myth really quick here. When women run for office, regardless of the position they seek, they are just as likely as their male counterparts to win their races. This is a very important fact. Despite all of those barriers, the culture, the discrimination, when women run, they actually win in the same numbers. So then why don't women run? Reason number one, women are substantially more likely than men to perceive the electoral environment as highly competitive and biased against female candidates. Even when we actually have a good shot, we perceive that we don't have a good shot. Reason number two, 2008, was very inspiring for many, but was also daunting for many because these two women were particularly treated really bad, and I won't go into the details. Reason number three, we don't look in the mirror and see a politician. We don't see ourselves as leader. We have the Leah Webb complex. Are you kidding me? No way. Reason number four, I won't tell this long story. This is my son, my 6-year-old son, Kofi. Basically, when we see a job posting that has 10 qualifications, a man will look at it, he'll have 2, and he'll say, that job is mine, I'm going for it. A woman will look at it, she'll have 8 of the qualifications, and she'll say, oh, I couldn't possibly apply because I don't have the 2. Okay? Round up, ladies. That's the point of that story. Reason number 5, we think it's yucky. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this campaign. I grew up in Seattle. This is the Mr. Yuck campaign. Basically, parents were encouraged to put this sticker on household medications, items that you didn't want your kids to touch. Of course, whoever created this never had small children because whatever you put and you tell them not to touch is exactly what they're going to touch. So the campaign was a failure, but the notion here is that women perceive politics as yucky, as messy, as dirty. I don't want to get engaged in it. Women are not asked to run. So if there's one thing that we want to take you here today and for you to do is make sure that you invite a woman to lead. But that's actually the biggest, one of the biggest reasons. And finally, we're really busy. We have a lot of things on our plates, and it's often very challenging to juggle all of those. And it's part of the reason why we've got storytellers that can help us figure out how to move the needle forward. We didn't have enough time to share with you all the nuts and bolts of actually running for office. The most important message we wanted to send is that the White House Project is not the only organization by any stretch of the imagination that is working on getting more women into political leadership. We have a number of sister organizations, and if I had time, I would give a shout out to all of my sisters and colleagues at all of these organizations, including the Women's Campaign School at Yale, which Reshma sits on the advisory board of, Emily's List, Annie's List, Emerge. You all have heard of many of these organizations. So there actually is a very collaborative network of organizations and programs that are trying to get more women into office. And Google any of these and you can find out about trainings, about how to get money for your campaign, leverage these as resources. So I want to talk a little bit about what it really takes in order to be successful advancing your leadership, and I want to pull Reshma in on this. So we spent a lot of time at the White House Project training women, and we pretty much know what the success equation is for being savvy, successful in advancing your leadership. Of course, the secret is that what makes young women successful, we train women who are anywhere from 21 to about 35 years of age in advancing their leadership in politics, has very little to do with politics. It's actually much more fundamental than that. And there are really 3 outcomes that we have that are an important part of what we call the success equation. So the first is that women need to demonstrate the leadership assets that we know are required in order for them to be successful. And I want to talk a little bit and have Reshma actually talk a little bit about one asset, which is really around viability. It goes back to that Prezi element with the mirror and the woman looking in it. Women who are very successful advancing their leadership running actually have to be able to imagine and see themselves in the role. And I want you to share a little bit about your decision, right, your bold risk to actually leave a very comfy job as general counsel, right, to go and run for office. How did you do that?
Right. So in 2010, I ran for Congress. And I was always one of those young women who knew exactly what she wanted to do. When I was 12 years old, if you asked me, I would have raised my hand and said, I want to run for office. I then found myself waking up when I was 34 years old. I had just torn my ACL, so I was on my couch for 4 months, depressed. I couldn't read, I couldn't run, I couldn't do all the things I was used to doing, and it forced me to really think about my life. And at that moment, I was the deputy general counsel of an $8 billion public hedge fund. I could see the possibility of buying an apartment like in my horizon. I should have been waking up for joy every day. But instead, I was coming home in the fetal position every day. And partially because I wasn't living the life that I wanted to live. I was in the wrong line. I had always known I wanted to serve, and public service was like my heart. But I wasn't doing that. And so I literally kind of walked into my boss's office one day and quit. And it was because many women in my life suggested that I run for office. And they said it once, they said it twice, and then I finally kind of got it in my head, and I started taking all those steps, right? I started meeting with consultants. I started thinking about my campaign. I called my father, who I felt like was going to be the hardest conversation because, I helped my parents pay their mortgage. And my father said basically, like, finally, you're starting to really think about what your dreams are. And so ultimately, I also then, would have panic attacks on the subway because I thought I wouldn't be smart enough, and I was afraid of answering those policy questions I thought that I couldn't answer. And I had to visualize what failure was, right? I had to ask myself, well, if I lost this race, if I was broke, if I let everybody down, if I publicly humiliated myself, would I be able to kind of get up and like live another day? And kind of for me, like imagining that failure, like enabled me to like just get up and run.
Beautiful. The second outcome that we're trying to really focus on is increasing the number of women who are actively pursuing positions of power and influence. And Reshma has just done such a good job of being clear about what her next step is. Right now, we're very excited to have you running for public advocate. Of course, the third outcome is increasing the number of women who have the mentors and the sponsors they need to be effective, because you can have all the leadership assets in the world and you can have your eye on a prize, but if you don't have the right people who are giving you feedback and vouching for you, then there's no way that you're going to succeed. And I would love for you to tell a little bit about how you've engaged and cultivated the right people in your ecosystem.
So when you run for office, it's like starting a business, right? It's really important to be able to fundraise, unfortunately. And so one of the first things that I did when I decided to run, and even now in this campaign, was really identified some key women who I could really ask and say, will you help me raise X? Will you be my finance chair? Will you go out there and pick up the phone and make those calls, and organize those events, put those fundraisers together, and really put your reputation on the line for me? And it's always hard, right? It is always hard to ask somebody for money, right? And ask somebody to raise you X amount of money. And I really had to force myself to do that. And that was really incredibly helpful for me, was getting those validators.
That's fantastic. So basically, we're trying to clone Reshma and create an entire generation of her. We have a few more minutes, and we thought it would be great to throw it out for anyone who wanted to ask a question.
Oh, come on, you guys aren't that shy. Is anyone in the room thinking about running for office one day? Nobody.
Right there.
Okay, go for it. I was going to say, because I have a bunch of questions.
No, there actually is. I think we've... Yes, just shout.
Yeah, just walk right up to the mic. Oh, she's pretty fabulous, Miss Carol.
Carol Stone, I just want to say a really heartwarming story to how you actually got to what you wanted to do, but were able to help your family first too. Is there anything I talked about in the life of marriage and non-marriage, is there anything between being a sort of a tycoon in business and now doing what you're doing in public office, things you miss from one?
Well, I mean, I think that's such a great question. I think that the experience that I got in the private sector has been enormously helpful to me as somebody who's going to be a public servant. One of the things, I recently started an organization called Girls Who Code, which is to teach teenage girls how to computer program, because we have this enormous STEM gap in this country, right? And, I was able to go out there and go to Twitter and go to GE and go to Google and actually make that pitch and raise resources to help teach my girls because of the experience that I got in the private sector. So I think it's enormously helpful.
Does anybody else want to come up and ask a question? It's interesting. If I can jump in and ask one, my observation is, our ambivalence, I think, to embrace ourselves as women with the appropriate level of self-esteem and understanding of our importance is, I think, one of the things, and I'm curious to know what you think, because I think this plays itself out with women in a majority of ways. Women who end up in horrible relationships, women who sell themselves short in the marketplace or in their career. It's a theme of us emerging, from, I think, the shadow of our own self-doubt. Do you think it's one of the things that really does? Running for political office is almost like, if we can bring ourselves out of the thought in our own mind that says we're small, then we can get to this place, which is, I think, at the other end of this whole spectrum, which is not only are we really huge, we're powerful beyond measure.
Yeah, you've hit on, you just really hit the nail on the head. What the White House Project is doing is helping women to just shift their consciousness around their ability to lead. I feel like my mother gave me the most powerful gift, which is this really strong conviction that I am the most powerful change agent in my own journey. And so that's why we talk about igniting your leadership at the White House Project, because you're already a leader. It's all about just us helping you create the conditions under which your leadership can thrive, but it starts with you and you recognizing that you already have within you everything that you need to be successful, and you're such a great model of it.
And I also think it's, we've had this really interesting year politically, right, where we really have seen this war on women. We're having conversations about our bodies in a way that I think our mothers thought we would never be relitigating. And I think that it's really awakened a new generation of women who kind of had that yucky feeling about politics to say, I got to get involved. And, running for office is not for everybody. And, I wake up every morning, I got married recently, and when I had the 2 minutes to really think, I was like, why do I want to do this again? Because you are really getting up. You don't have privacy. You're constantly asking people for money. You're constantly in this somewhat sometimes feeling gross world, right? But for me, I really, we say this in Hinduism, I really believe in Dharma, right? That God kind of put me on this earth to serve, right? And I wish I wanted to do something else, but this is kind of what I think, like all of us, right? Your chosen path is. But I think it's so important for us as women to recognize that if that's not your chosen path, then you must support the process, right? Whether that's voting, whether that's knocking on a door, whether that's writing a check, we have to get engaged, because that's, women are powerful right now. We have 11 million of us have power over hiring decisions. We Facebook more, we tweet more, we make 85% of all consumer purchases. We are powerful. But that number, like what Tiffany is doing, is so important, because that number has to change. And if that number does not change, our society's not going to change.
Yeah, and it's an amazing organization, because you're right. Mandela made it famous, we are powerful beyond measure, and what does the world gain by you playing small? But a woman wrote that. I don't know if you know. It's one of the most famous speeches in the world. A woman wrote it. And it's like, we run things, we're the head of organizations in our own little universes every day of our lives. If you have a husband, if you have children, women tend to, I think, organically really get involved. We have a heart when we see a problem to want to change it, to want to get in and fix it and make the wrong things right. And I believe that, what you're saying is so completely important for us to embrace as a community of women, because as we network and as we meet people and all of that, what does it really matter, though, if the seed in us still says, I'm just a little mustard seed? When if you put a little faith in that mustard seed, right, you can do anything. And it's why do you think that is, though? Why do with the young women that you're dealing with in this organization, why do you think they have? Is it just low self-esteem? And what's the exercise past it? What is the exercise past it? That's my question.
It's interesting. I wouldn't perceive it as self-esteem. I actually think that a lot of young women are incredibly confident. They're very strong in their convictions. They want to create impact in the world. They have a level of ambition. I think, unfortunately, we've set them up to not understand the rules of engagement when they get further along in life. So we basically condition young women to believe that if you just put your head down, and if you just achieve great results, and if you just perform well, that you're going to be recognized, and that that's what matters the most. And for a long time in our lives, we can kind of get by on that. It actually works. But then, of course, you get out into the real world, whether it's political, every environment is political, whether it's the working world, and all of a sudden you realize that it's not a meritocracy. And I think that that's the experience that we find ourselves in that we're just not prepared for. I wouldn't say that we don't have the self-esteem or that we're just not prepared for it. And that's why organizations like the White House Project are here. And that's why Reshma is here as a mentor and as a model of leadership for all of us. And so if there's anything we want to leave you with, it's invite a woman to run, encourage her, and to ignite your leadership.
Yeah. And what is the most important thing, Reshma, that you said a number of women encouraged you to run? Is there one story or person, one thing that a woman said to you that really clicked, that made the light bulb come on for you, that, yes, I'm not living an authentic life and I need to go and do what I was put here to do?
I mean, I think for me it was really the failure aspect, right? It was really getting my head around that I didn't have to do the job before I could apply for the job, right? That it was okay to, quote, apply for a job that I wasn't qualified for. And I think getting my head around that enabled me to just go out there and just do it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, unless anyone has a question, I think, there's one over here. Do you want to? Yes, I believe it is. Go ahead.
I guess my question was primarily like, as you kind of came to believe in yourself and believe that you could, even though you might not have all the answers or that you might have two of the things and maybe not the other eight, but you could develop those things. How did you communicate that to other people in a way that, because you said you had to go out and ask people to support you and believe in you. And for me, I find myself like, how do you share that vision with other people and get them to believe in that as well? And do you find a difference when you ask women for that kind of support and belief and when you ask men for that kind of support and belief? And how do you handle those different situations?
So I really believe in like authenticity. I really believe in like authenticity of leadership, right? And so like just really exercising and articulating your passion and being really real about it and really asking for what you want. And so I think first was like once I believed in myself, I could really sit down in a meeting and be like, I'm going to be the next public advocate and here's what I need to help me get there. And secondly, I think really kind of being in a space of like we're a team, right? And that I need X skill set from you to help us get there. And I think people really want to hear that. So many times I think as women we're afraid to ask for help. And I think when we start asking for help, like the hands will reach out and they will carry you along the journey, right? And so really doing that. And I love women. Like I am a big believer in women. And for me, it's like my first 1,000 friends on Facebook, my first 1,000 friends on Twitter, my first $10,000 are always from women. I'm just starting my public advocate campaign, and it's women who give me my seed capital, right? It's women who are like, I'll host that event for you. I would never be able to run for office were it not for women. But secondly, I also focus on my male allies. I think that like men are really important to like the next generation of female leadership. And I think, especially for the work I'm doing with Girls Who Code, it's often been, the CEO of Twitter has 2 young girls, right? He understands why it's important to close the STEM gap and is willing to invest in a program that's going to do that. So I think also making sure that we're conscious and reaching out to the men in our lives is really important.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for what you're doing. Can we please give them a round of applause? Tiffany and Reshma, thank you. Thank you.